I found my husband digging in the garden at 3 a.m. and asked him what he was doing. He turned to me, crying, and said, "Forgive me, but it was never you." I didn't understand what he meant, but when I looked into the hole, I was horrified. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sound woke me at 3:17 a.m. Not a crash or a scream, nothing so obvious. Just the soft scrape of metal against earth, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond our bedroom window. At 68 years old, you learn to distinguish between the sounds that matter and the ones that don't. This one mattered. I turned in bed. Jacob's side was empty. The sheets pulled back carelessly. The bathroom light was off. I sat up slowly, my joints protesting after 43 years of waking beside this man, and reached for my robe. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my feet as I moved through our farmhouse in eastern Pennsylvania, past the photographs that lined the hallway. Our wedding day, holidays, grandchildren I saw too rarely now. But no pictures of Michael and David. Never those. The kitchen door stood ajar, and through it, I could see him. My husband of 45 years, kneeling in our garden beneath the skeletal branches of the apple tree we'd planted together in 1983. The moonlight was unnaturally bright, turning everything silver and strange. He had a shovel. He was digging. Jacob? He froze. Even from 15 feet away, I could see his shoulders stiffen. He didn't turn around immediately, and in that hesitation, I felt something shift, some fundamental certainty about my life beginning to crack. "Maria." His voice was hoarse. "Go back to bed." I moved closer instead, my slippers dampening with dew. "What are you doing?" "Please, just go inside." But I was already at the edge of the hole he'd dug, maybe 2 feet deep, and I could see something wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom. Something he'd been trying to unearth, or perhaps rebury. I couldn't tell which. That's when he turned to face me. I had seen my husband cry exactly 3 times in 45 years. Once at our wedding, overwhelmed. Once at his mother's funeral. And once in the hospital, 40 years ago, when they told us our sons were gone. But this was different. These weren't tears of grief or joy. These were tears of something darker, something that looked like terror and guilt twisted together. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God help me, Maria, I'm so sorry. But it was never you." The words made no sense. I stared at him, then at the hole, then back at his face, gaunt and pale in the moonlight, suddenly ancient. "What are you talking about?" He reached down and pulled out the wrapped bundle. His hands shook as he peeled back the oilcloth, revealing a glass bottle and a small metal box, both sealed with wax that had yellowed with age. "You need to see this," he said. "You've blamed yourself for 40 years, and every day I let you. Every single day I was a coward." My legs felt unsteady. The garden tilted slightly, and I had to grip the shovel he'd left standing in the earth. "Jacob, what is this?" Instead of answering, he opened the metal box. Inside was a folded letter, the paper brittle with age, and a small glass vial containing maybe 2 tablespoons of liquid, yellowish, syrupy, catching the moonlight. "Do you remember what I gave you that night?" he asked quietly. "Before you left?" "The night." He meant October 17th, 1985, the night that ended everything. "You made me tea," I said slowly. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "You said it would calm my nerves." I'd been upset about something. I can't even remember what anymore. "You'd been crying because David had a fever and Michael wouldn't sleep and you were exhausted." Jacob's hands trembled as he held up the vial. This was in it. Not tea herbs. This. I stared at the yellowish liquid. "I don't understand." "Diazepam. A heavy dose. Mixed with something else? I don't even know what the man called it. Something to make you sleep deeply." He looked at me then, and his eyes were hollow. "You weren't supposed to wake up until morning. You were supposed to sleep through the whole night, you and the boys. I needed you to." The world seemed to contract around that vial. "Why would you—" "I was in trouble, Maria. Deep trouble. There were men, dangerous men, and I owed them money. A lot of money from a business deal that went wrong. They told me I had until that night to pay or—" he swallowed hard. "Or they'd come to the house. They'd make sure I understood what it meant to default on a debt to them. They mentioned you. They mentioned the boys' names. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The garden spun slowly around me. I had a plan, he continued, words tumbling out now like he'd been holding them for decades. I was going to meet them that night, at the quarry outside town. I had some of the money, not all, but enough to negotiate, to buy time. But I didn't want you and the children awake. I didn't want you to know where I was going or what I was doing. So I drugged you. I thought, God, I thought you'd just sleep peacefully and wake up in the morning and I'd be back, and everything would be resolved. My mind was reeling backward through time. October 17th, 1985. I'd felt strange after drinking that tea, dizzy. My thoughts had been foggy, my limbs heavy. And then, the phone rang. I whispered. Jacob nodded. The hospital. Your mother. My mother had collapsed that evening. A stroke. They called to tell me she was in critical condition, that I should come immediately if I wanted to say goodbye. And I had gone. Drugged, disoriented, but unable to refuse. I'd bundled the boys into the car, both of them already drowsy in their pajamas. Michael was 7. David was 5. I was going to see my dying mother. I never made it to the hospital. I fell asleep at the wheel, I said. The words automatic, rehearsed from 4 decades of repetition. About 15 minutes from the hospital, the car went off the road on that curve near Miller's Creek. It rolled twice. The boys... I couldn't finish. The boys died instantly, Jacob said softly. You survived with minor injuries. And when you woke up in the hospital, they told you what happened. You'd fallen asleep driving. It was ruled an accident. Exhaustion, grief about your mother, the stress of having 2 young children. No one tested your blood. No one had any reason to. But you knew. I knew. His voice broke. I knew what I'd done to you, what I'd taken from you, from us. And I wanted to tell you, God, Maria. I wanted to tell you every day for 40 years, but I was a coward. I was afraid you'd hate me, afraid you'd leave, afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. I looked down at the letter in the metal box. What's that? A confession. I wrote it 2 weeks after the accident. I couldn't live with what I'd done, but I couldn't confess either. So I wrote it all down, buried it here, and told myself that someday, somehow, you'd know the truth. He laughed bitterly. 40 years. It took me 40 years. Why now? My voice was steady, cold. I barely recognized it. Why tell me now, Jacob? His face changed. The guilt was still there, but now something else crept in. Fear. Because they're back, he whispered. Who's back? The men I owed money to. Or their sons. I don't know exactly who, but someone's been leaving messages. Notes under the windshield wiper of my truck. An envelope in our mailbox yesterday with no return address. They know about that night. They know about the debt. And they want what they're owed, with 40 years of interest. The apple tree's shadow fell across both of us, long and dark. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The ordinary sounds of a Pennsylvania night, but everything had changed. Everything I'd believed about myself, about my guilt, about the worst moment of my life, all of it was a lie built on my husband's cowardice. How much do you owe? I asked. The original debt was $20,000, with their interest calculations. He closed his eyes. They want $300,000. We don't have that kind of money. I know. What did these notes say exactly? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I took it with numb fingers and tilted it toward the moonlight. The past never stays buried. Neither do debts. 7 days, or we collect another way. The note was dated 5 days ago. There's more, Jacob said quietly. This afternoon, while you were at the grocery store, someone came to the house. A young man, maybe 30. He said his name was Jeffrey Penn. He said his father was one of the men I owed money to 40 years ago. His father died in prison 10 years back, something about racketeering. But before he died, he kept detailed records, ledgers, evidence of everyone who owed him money and never paid. What did this Jeffrey want? Everything. The house, the farm, our savings, or, Jacob's voice dropped, or he goes to the police with evidence that I drugged you the night of the accident, that I'm culpable in the boys' deaths. that I've been covering it up for decades. My hands had gone completely numb. He'd do that? He already implied that if he can't collect the debt, he'll collect justice instead. He'll destroy what's left of our lives, our reputations. He'll make sure everyone knows what I did. I looked at my husband, this man I'd shared a life with, who'd held me through grief, who'd been my companion through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary loss. This man who'd let me carry the guilt of our children's deaths for 40 years while he buried the truth in our garden. "Where are these ledgers?" I asked. "I don't know." He wouldn't say, just that he has them and they're safe. "And this Jeffrey Penn, did you verify who he really is?" Jacob blinked. "What do you mean? Did you see identification? Proof that he's actually the son of one of these men? Or did you just take his word because you were afraid?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Jacob's face. He knew details. Things about that night that only someone involved would know. Or things you told him when he showed up and you panicked. I felt something stirring inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But something sharper. Colder. Something that had been sleeping for 4 decades while I'd drowned in manufactured guilt. We're going inside. We're going to look at everything. The letter, these notes, any information you have about these men from 40 years ago. And then we're going to figure out if this Jeffrey Penn is who he says he is, or if this is something else entirely. Maria, you don't get to think anymore, Jacob. You lost that right 40 years ago when you put poison in my tea and let me believe I killed our children. My voice was ice. Now we're going to fix this. Together. Because that's what you should have done the morning after the accident instead of letting me live in hell. I walked toward the house, my spine straight, leaving him kneeling in the dirt beside the hole he'd dug. Behind me, I heard him gathering the bottle, the box, the letter that held his confession. Inside the kitchen, I turned on every light, made coffee, spread everything out on the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, where I'd sat countless mornings staring at nothing, remembering 2 small boys who'd never grown up. The letter was written in Jacob's handwriting, younger and steadier than his script now. I read it slowly, methodically. It detailed everything. The business deal that went wrong, the loan sharks, the threats, the plan to meet them at the quarry, the sedative he'd slipped into my tea. And then I found the part that made my blood run cold. I planned to pay them half that night and work out terms for the rest. But Maria left before the drugs took full effect. I panicked. I went to meet them anyway, and when I explained what happened, that my wife had taken the car and might be driving while impaired, they laughed. They said it was perfect. If anything happened to her, if she got caught, she'd take the fall and I'd be free to repay them without police attention on me. They called it insurance. When I heard about the accident, about the boys, I knew I'd lost everything that mattered, but they still wanted their money. So I paid them. It took me 3 years, but I paid every penny. I thought it was over. I set the letter down. "You paid them." "Yes. It took until 1988, but I paid the full debt with interest." "Then why would their children come looking for more money now?" Jacob had no answer. He sat across from me, looking older than his 70 years, the secret he'd carried finally exposed but offering him no relief. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where truth had been buried for so long. The first hints of dawn were touching the horizon. In a few hours, our neighbors would wake up. The mailman would make his rounds. Life would continue its ordinary rhythm, but nothing would ever be ordinary again. Because I knew 3 things with absolute certainty now. First, my husband had poisoned me and allowed me to carry the guilt for our children's deaths for 40 years. Second, someone was threatening us, using that truth as leverage. And third, and this was the part that made my hands shake as I gripped the window frame, I was going to find out who was behind these threats and why. Not for Jacob, not anymore. For Michael and David, for the truth they deserved, even in death. And for the woman I'd been before, guilt destroyed her. I turned back to Jacob. "Tomorrow, you're going to tell me everything. Every name, every detail, every person who was involved in that business deal and those loans. And then we're going to start digging. Not in the garden this time. We're going to dig into the past until we find out exactly what's happening now. Maria, this isn't a discussion. Someone is using our dead children as leverage for money. Either it's legitimate or it's a con. Either way, I'm going to find out which. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. And Jacob, if I find out you've lied to me about anything else, anything at all, you won't have to worry about these loan sharks or their children. You'll have to worry about me. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to our bedroom, leaving him sitting at the table with his 40-year-old confession spread out before him like a map of every way he'd failed me. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the farm, and began making lists in my mind. Names to investigate, questions to ask, records to find. Somewhere out there, someone thought they could use my grief and my husband's guilt to extract money from us. They'd made a mistake, because the woman who'd fallen asleep at the wheel 40 years ago, the exhausted, drugged, guilt-ridden mother who'd spent 4 decades in penance for a crime she didn't commit, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Someone who finally knew the truth. And someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. By 7 a.m., I had Jacob's confession memorized and a plan forming in my mind. The names he'd written down 40 years ago were my starting point. Vincent Penn, the primary loan shark. Thomas Carver, Penn's partner. And someone called Dimitri. No last name, just a first name and the notation enforcer beside it. 3 men who'd held my husband's debt. Who'd laughed when they heard his drugged wife might crash her car. Who'd taken his money for 3 years afterward without mercy. I needed to know if they were really dead, as Jeffrey Penn claimed, and if they had children who might legitimately be coming for old debts. Jacob shuffled into the kitchen around 7:30, looking like he'd aged another decade overnight. I poured him coffee without a word and slid a piece of paper across the table. Write down everything Jeffrey Penn said to you yesterday. Exact words if you can remember them. What he looked like. What he was wearing. Whether he arrived in a car and, if so, what kind. Maria, just do it. While he wrote, I called our daughter, Catherine. She lived 2 hours away in Philadelphia with her husband, Richard, and their 2 teenagers. We spoke maybe once a month, dutiful calls that felt more obligatory than warm. The boys' deaths had created a distance between us that never fully closed. She was 3 years old when they died, too young to remember them, but old enough to grow up in the shadow of their absence. Mom? Her voice was surprised. I never called this early. Is everything okay? I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask questions yet. A pause. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just need information. You work for that law firm in Philadelphia. Do you have access to public records? Criminal databases? Mom, I'm a paralegal, not a private investigator. What's this about? I need you to look up 3 men. Vincent Penn, Thomas Carver, and someone named Dimitri. I don't have a last name for him. These would be criminal records from the 1980s, probably in Pennsylvania. I need to know if they're alive or dead, and if dead, whether they left children. Why do you need... Catherine, please. Just do this for me. I'll explain everything soon, but right now I need this information. Another pause. Longer this time. You're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry. But will you do it? I'll try. It might take a day or 2. I'll have to be careful about accessing records that aren't related to firm cases. Be very careful. And Catherine, don't tell Richard about this yet. Please. Mom, please. She agreed reluctantly and hung up. I knew she'd call back within a few hours, full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. But by then, I'd be further along in my investigation. Jacob slid the paper back to me. His handwriting was shaky, but the details were thorough. Jeffrey Penn, early 30s, dark hair going gray at the temples, about 5'10", lean build, wearing expensive clothes, a charcoal suit that looked tailored, driving a black Mercedes sedan, current year model. He'd arrived at 2:15 p.m. and stayed approximately 45 minutes. Did he give you any documentation? I asked. Business card? Copy of these ledgers he mentioned? Nothing. He said documentation would come once we agreed to terms. And what terms did he propose? $300,000 in full within 7 days, or he starts liquidating what we own piece by piece, the house, the farm equipment, our savings. He said he had a lawyer ready to file liens. On what grounds? A 40-year-old illegal debt? Jacob's face darkened. He said the debt was real, documented, and that he'd present it as a legitimate business loan my father-in-law had co-signed. He said he had forged documents that would make it look legal enough to tie us up in court for years, bleeding us dry in legal fees even if we eventually won. My father, dead for 30 years now. Convenient. So he's threatening us with fraud and blackmail, I said quietly. That's not the behavior of someone legitimately collecting an old debt. That's extortion. Maria, these aren't people you mess with. These aren't people, Jacob. This is one person, making claims we haven't verified, using fear to extract money. I stood. I'm going to town. There's someone I need to talk to. Who? Carl Morrison. Jacob went pale. The police chief? Maria? No. You can't involve the police. If this gets out, if people know what I did, Carl retired 5 years ago. He's not the police chief anymore. He's a 72-year-old man who still remembers the accident because he was first on the scene. I grabbed my purse. And he's the only person I trust who might remember details about that night that could help us now. What are you going to tell him? Nothing yet. I'm just going to ask some questions about old cases, about loan sharks operating in the area in the 80s. Carl dealt with organized crime his whole career. If Vincent Penn and his associates were real players, Carl will remember. I left before Jacob could protest further. Carl Morrison lived in a modest ranch house on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden his late wife had planted decades ago. He answered the door in flannel and jeans, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile when he saw me. Maria Oliveira. Haven't seen you in what, 2 years? 3. I'm sorry I haven't visited more. Come in, come in. Coffee? We sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of his grandchildren and certificates from his 40 years on the force. I accepted the coffee and spent a few minutes on pleasantries before steering the conversation where I needed it. Carl, I have a strange question. Do you remember much about organized crime in the area back in the 80s? Loan sharks, that kind of thing? His eyes sharpened immediately. That's a hell of a question. Why? Someone approached Jacob recently claiming to collect on an old debt. I'm trying to figure out if the claim is legitimate or if we're being scammed. Who's making the claim? A man named Jeffrey Penn. Says his father was Vincent Penn. Carl's face changed. He set down his coffee carefully. Vincent Penn. Christ, there's a name I haven't heard in 20 years. You knew him? Knew of him. Small-time operator? Thought he was bigger than he was. Loan sharking. Some gambling. Some protection rackets. He ran with a guy named Tommy Carver. They were partners in most ventures. Neither of them was particularly smart, but they were mean enough that people paid them anyway. My heart was beating faster. What happened to them? Penn got arrested in '94 for racketeering, spent 15 years in Graterford. Died in prison? 2009? 2010? Heart attack, I think. Carver got out of the game earlier, maybe early 90s. Moved to Florida, as far as I know. Heard he died down there a few years back. Cancer. Did Penn have a son? Carl frowned, thinking. Not that I ever heard about. Penn wasn't married, as far as I knew. Played the field, but no family. Why? This Jeffrey Penn claims to be his son. Says he has his father's old ledgers with records of debts that were never repaid. Interesting. Carl's cop instincts were clearly engaged now. Did you verify his identity? Not yet. That's why I'm here. I wanted to know if the people he's talking about were real before I start digging deeper. They were real, all right. But Maria, he leaned forward. If someone's coming to you about an old debt from the 80s, that's not how legitimate debt collection works. Even illegal debts. After 40 years? There's no statute of limitations being enforced. No legal mechanism to collect. Anyone who comes at you now is running a con or looking for hush money about something else. The pieces were clicking together in my mind. Could someone have gotten hold of old records from Penn's operations? From his prison effects, maybe? Maybe. Prison effects usually go to next of kin or get destroyed if there's nobody to claim them. But if Penn really did keep detailed ledgers, Carl studied my face. Maria, what's really going on? This isn't just about Jacob owing money for some business deal, is it? I hesitated. Carl had been kind to me the night of the accident, gentle when he'd pulled me from the wreckage, steady when he'd testified at the inquest, but trusting him with the truth meant exposing Jacob's crime, meant potentially destroying everything, but it also meant having an ally who knew how criminals operated. There's more to it, I said slowly, but I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can explain. Can I ask you something else? Of course. If someone wanted to run an extortion scheme based on old criminal records, how would they do it? What would they need? Carl's eyes narrowed. They'd need information that's embarrassing or incriminating enough to make the target pay rather than fight. And they'd need the target to believe they're vulnerable, that the information coming out would destroy them. And how would you verify if someone is who they claim to be? Check public records. Death certificates, birth certificates, property records, criminal records. If this Jeffrey Penn exists, there'll be a paper trail. If he doesn't, Carl paused. Then someone's playing a very dangerous game with you. I thanked him and left, my mind racing. On the drive home, I made a detour to the county courthouse and spent an hour in the records office. The clerk, a woman about my age named Dorothy, who I'd known peripherally for years, helped me navigate the databases. No birth certificate for Jeffrey Penn with Vincent Penn listed as father. No death certificate for Vincent Penn showing surviving children. No property records. No business licenses, no criminal record for anyone named Jeffrey Penn in Pennsylvania aged 25 to 40. The man who'd threatened my husband didn't officially exist. I was pulling into our driveway when I saw the car, a black Mercedes sedan parked beside Jacob's truck. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Jeffrey Penn had come back. I parked and walked into the house slowly, carefully. Through the window, I could see them in the kitchen. Jacob, pale and trembling, and a younger man in an expensive suit, leaning against our counter like he owned it. When I entered, the man turned. He was handsome in a calculated way, his dark hair styled perfectly, his smile predatory. Mrs. Oliveira, your husband said you were out. I'm Jeffrey Penn. He extended his hand. I didn't take it. I know who you claim to be. His smile faltered slightly. Claim? There's no birth certificate connecting you to Vincent Penn. No record of your existence before about 5 years ago. So whoever you are, you're not Vincent Penn's son. The kitchen went very quiet. Jeffrey Penn's smile vanished completely. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. You've been busy. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could handle this the easy way. Who are you really? I asked. He studied me for a long moment, then laughed, a sound without humor. Smarter than I expected. Your husband made you sound like a guilt-ridden recluse, but you've got some spine after all. Answer the question. Names don't matter. What matters is what I know and what I can prove. He pulled out his phone and held it up. On the screen was a photo of Jacob's confession letter, the one that had been buried in our garden. I have this. I have photographs. I have enough evidence to destroy both of you. My blood ran cold. How? Your husband isn't the only one who buries secrets in gardens. Sometimes people dig them up. He pocketed the phone. The price just went up. $400,000 now. You have 5 days. We don't have that kind of money. Then get creative. Mortgage the farm. Sell it. I don't care how you do it. But if I don't have $400,000 by Saturday... A knock at the door interrupted him. We all froze. The knock came again, authoritative and insistent. Police. Open up, please. Jeffrey Penn's face went from confident to dangerous in an instant. He moved toward the back door, but I stepped in front of him. You go out that door. You confirm everything I've suspected about you. He glared at me, then at Jacob, calculating. The knock came again. I went to answer it. Carl Morrison stood on our porch, still in his civilian clothes, but wearing the expression he'd had during 40 years as a cop. Behind him was a younger woman in uniform, an actual officer. Maria, sorry to bother you, but we had a report of suspicious activity at this address. Mind if we come in? I hadn't reported anything, but I wasn't about to turn away the cavalry. Please, I said, stepping aside. As they entered, Jeffrey Penn was already putting his charming mask back on, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Trapped, reassessing, looking for an exit strategy. "Officers," he said smoothly. "I'm just here visiting family friends. Is there a problem?" Carl looked at him, then at me, then at Jacob's pale face. "That depends. Are you Jeffrey Penn?" The man hesitated just a fraction too long before answering, and in that hesitation, I knew we'd just won the first battle. But the war was far from over. Carl Morrison's question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. "Are you Jeffrey Penn?" The man in the expensive suit smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd been caught and was now deciding whether to run or fight. "I am." "Why? Is there something I should know about?" "Just a routine inquiry," Carl said easily. "We've had reports of a confidence scheme operating in the area. Someone impersonating the relatives of deceased criminals, trying to collect on fabricated debts." "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I watched Jeffrey Penn's face carefully. For just a moment, genuine fear flickered across his features before he locked it down. "That's terrible. No, I'm here legitimately. Mr. Oliveira and I are discussing some old business matters his family had with mine." "What kind of business?" the uniformed officer asked. Her name tag read Ramirez, and her eyes were sharp. "Private business. Financial matters that don't concern—" "I'd like to see some identification," Officer Ramirez interrupted. "Driver's license, please." Jeffrey Penn reached for his wallet slowly, pulled out a license, and handed it over. Ramirez studied it, then passed it to Carl. I couldn't see it from where I stood, but I watched Carl's face carefully. "This says your name is Michael Brennan," Carl said quietly. The room exploded into motion. Michael Brennan, I refused to think of him as Jeffrey Penn anymore, lunged for the back door. Officer Ramirez moved faster, intercepting him, spinning him against the wall with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, he was in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his calculated charm completely shattered. "Michael Brennan," Ramirez said formally, "you're being detained for questioning regarding fraud and extortion. You have the right to remain silent." "This is harassment," Brennan shouted. "I haven't done anything. These people owe my family money." "Your family being Vincent Penn?" Carl asked. "The Vincent Penn who had no children according to every official record in Pennsylvania?" Brennan's face twisted with rage. "You can't prove anything. It's their word against mine. And they're the ones hiding secrets. Ask them about what really happened 40 years ago. Ask them about the night. That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through his rant like ice. Everyone turned to look at me. "Take him outside, please. I need to speak with Officer Morrison privately." Ramirez looked at Carl, who nodded. She escorted Brennan out, his protests fading as the door closed behind them. Jacob was shaking, gripping the edge of the kitchen table. Carl looked between us, his cop instincts clearly telling him there was much more to this story. "Maria," he said gently, "what's really going on?" I made a decision. The kind of decision that could destroy what remained of my family, but also the kind that might finally set me free. "Jacob, show him the letter." "Maria, no. Show him. Now." My husband's hands trembled as he retrieved the metal box from where he'd hidden it in the study. He placed it on the kitchen table, and I watched Carl open it, read the confession slowly, his face growing harder with each word. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully and looked at Jacob with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, but a deep, cold disappointment. "You drugged her," Carl said quietly. "You drugged your wife the night she crashed and killed your sons, and you let her think it was her fault for 40 years. Jacob couldn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to protect my family." "You were trying to protect yourself," Carl snapped. "Jesus Christ, Jacob. Do you have any idea—" He stopped, took a breath, visibly collecting himself. "This changes everything. This is potential evidence of negligent homicide, of obstruction, of— "I know what it is," I interrupted. "But right now, I need to know how Michael Brennan got hold of this information. Jacob buried that confession in our garden 40 years ago. The only way Brennan could know about it is if someone told him where to look, or if—" I stopped. My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't seen before. Or if someone was watching when Jacob buried it, Carl finished. You're thinking someone's been sitting on this information for decades, waiting for the right moment to use it. Or the right buyer, I said slowly. What if this isn't about collecting an old debt at all? What if someone knew about Jacob's confession and sold that information to Brennan or hired him to collect? But who would? Jacob started, then stopped. His face went gray. Oh, God. Thomas Carver. You said he moved to Florida, I said. You said he got out of the loan sharking business. That's what I heard. But Tommy, Jacob swallowed hard. Tommy was there that night, at the quarry. He's the one who laughed when I told them Maria had taken the car while drugged. He's the one who said it was perfect insurance. Carl was already pulling out his phone. What's Carver's full name? Thomas J. Carver, lived in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Died 3 years ago. I checked when you mentioned him earlier. But if he kept records, if he had information about what happened that night, his estate would have gone to his heirs, I finished. Who inherited from him? Carl made several calls while Jacob and I sat in tense silence. I could hear Officer Ramirez outside, speaking to Michael Brennan in low, firm tones. Through the window, I saw neighbors starting to gather, Mrs. Patterson from across the road, old Jim Wells from the next farm over. Word would spread fast in a small community like ours. After 20 minutes, Carl hung up and turned to us with a grim expression. Thomas Carver had one daughter, Rebecca Carver, now Rebecca Brennan, married to one Michael Brennan 10 years ago. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Brennan is Carver's son-in-law, I said. He inherited his father-in-law's records. He knew about the loan, about the confession, about everything, and he decided to turn it into a payday. It's a classic extortion scheme, Carl confirmed. Brennan and his wife probably found the old records when Carver died. They saw an opportunity, target Jacob with threats about exposing his role in the boys' deaths unless he paid up. The fake identity as Jeffrey Penn was just theater, a way to make the threat seem more legitimate. Where is Rebecca Brennan now? I asked. Carl's expression darkened. That's the interesting part. According to the Clearwater Police, Rebecca Brennan filed a missing person report 3 months ago. Her husband disappeared with roughly $200,000 from their joint accounts. She hasn't seen him since. So Brennan was a con artist running from his own wife, using Jacob's guilt as his next score. The revelation should have made me feel better. We were dealing with a common criminal, not some sophisticated criminal organization. But instead, it made everything feel more dangerous. Desperate men did desperate things. What happens now? Jacob asked quietly. Now, Carl said. We need to figure out if Brennan has copies of that confession, what evidence he actually has, and who else might know about this. Because Maria's right, someone had to tell him where to dig in your garden, or he had to know about it beforehand. Either way, there's more to this story. A knock on the door interrupted us. Officer Ramirez stuck her head in. Chief, sorry, Mr. Morrison. You need to hear this. Brennan's asking for a deal. Says he'll trade information for reduced charges. We went outside. Michael Brennan sat in the back of the police car, his expensive suit disheveled, his perfect hair mussed. But his eyes were calculating, even now. I want immunity, he said when Carl approached. Full immunity, and I'll tell you everything. You're in no position to negotiate, Carl replied. I am if you want to know who else is involved in this. Brennan leaned forward as much as the handcuffs allowed. You think I came up with this plan on my own? I'm just the front man. Someone hired me to do this job. Someone who knew all about the Oliveras and what happened 40 years ago. Someone who's been waiting a long time to make them pay. My skin went cold. Who? Brennan looked at me, and his smile was ugly. Someone in your family, Mrs. Olivera. Someone who's been sitting on this secret, watching you suffer, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy you both. You're lying, Jacob said, but his voice wavered. Am I? Ask yourselves. Who knew about your confession, Jacob? Who could have known where you buried it? You think nobody saw you digging in your garden at midnight 40 years ago? You think nobody wondered what you were hiding? My mind raced through possibilities. Our children had been too young. My parents were dead. Jacob's parents were dead. Our siblings. My phone rang. Catherine. I answered with shaking hands. Hello? Mom. My daughter's voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. Not worry, not concern. Something harder. We need to talk. I found those records you asked about. And I found something else. Something about our family I think you should know. Catherine. What? Not on the phone. I'm coming there. I'll be there in 2 hours. She paused. And Mom? Bring Dad to the conversation. He's going to want to hear this too. She hung up before I could respond. Carl was watching me. What was that? My daughter. She found something. I looked at Brennan. What does Catherine have to do with this? But Brennan just smiled and leaned back in the seat, saying nothing more. Officer Ramirez took him to the station for formal processing. Carl stayed behind, helping me and Jacob piece together what we knew. But my mind was elsewhere, turning over Catherine's tone, the strange hardness in her voice. 2 hours felt like an eternity. When Catherine's car finally pulled into our driveway, I was standing on the porch waiting. She got out alone, no Richard, no children, and walked toward me with a manila folder clutched in her hands. Hi, Mom. Catherine? What's going on? She looked past me at Jacob, who'd come to stand in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable. I did what you asked. I looked up Vincent Penn, Thomas Carver, and that Dmitri person. Couldn't find a last name, but I found records of a Dmitri Volkov who worked with them in the 80s. Enforcer, like Dad's letter said. She opened the folder. But while I was searching, I cross-referenced our family name, and I found something interesting. What? Jacob asked. Catherine pulled out a document. Property records. From 1986. 1 year after Michael and David died. She handed it to me. I scanned it quickly, not understanding at first. It was a deed transfer for a property in Atlantic City, New Jersey, purchased by Thomas Carver for $50,000. Transferred to a Maria Catherine Santos, my mother's maiden name. I don't understand, I said slowly. Keep reading, Catherine said, her voice now cold. I flipped to the next page. A bank statement from 1986, showing a wire transfer of $50,000 from an account belonging to Thomas Carver to an account belonging to Grandma, I whispered. Your mother received $50,000 from Thomas Carver in 1986, Catherine said. The same year she supposedly died broke in a nursing home. The same year you were drowning in grief and guilt. She had money, Mom, a lot of it, and she never told you. Jacob's face had gone white. How did your mother get money from Tommy Carver? But I already knew. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Blackmail, I said quietly. After the accident, after she recovered from her stroke, she figured out what Jacob had done. Maybe she saw the evidence. Maybe Jacob confessed to her when he was desperate and grieving, and she used that information to extort money from the men who'd been involved. She wouldn't, Jacob started. She would, I interrupted. My mother was many things, but she was never weak. If she knew you'd caused her grandson's deaths, if she knew you'd drugged me, I looked at Catherine. Is there more? Catherine's hands were shaking now. I called the executor of Grandma's estate. She didn't die broke, Mom. She had over $200,000 in a trust that went to her sole beneficiary after she died. You, I said. Me. Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was 18 when Grandma died. They told me it was money from her life insurance. I used it for college, for my wedding, for the down payment on our house. I never questioned where it came from because I thought she'd saved it. I thought... She broke off, covering her face with her hands. Your grandmother was blackmailing them for years, Carl said quietly. He'd been standing in the doorway, taking all this in. That's how Carver knew about the confession. That's how the information survived. She was collecting money to keep quiet about what Jacob did. And when she died, I continued, my voice eerily calm, that information went into Carver's estate, where his daughter found it, where Michael Brennan decided to use it. I looked at my daughter, my grown daughter who'd unknowingly lived off blood money for 25 years, who'd been raised on the proceeds of her grandmother's blackmail scheme, who was staring at her father with an expression of mingled horror and rage. You killed them, Catherine said to Jacob. Her voice was very quiet. You killed my brothers. And Grandma knew. She knew. and she used it. And she never told Mom the truth. She let Mom suffer while she collected money from the people who helped you cover it up. Catherine, I never meant, Jacob began. You drugged her. Catherine's voice rose to a scream. You drugged Mom and sent her out to drive and my brothers died. And then you let her think it was her fault for 40 years. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face now. Did you know? Did you know what he did? I found out 3 days ago, I said. The same day Brennan started threatening us. Catherine stared at me, then at her father, then back at the documents in her shaking hands. I can't. I need to. She turned and ran to her car. I called after her, but she was already pulling away, tires spitting gravel, leaving us standing in the yard with the truth scattered between us like broken glass. Carl cleared his throat. Maria, Jacob, we need to talk about next steps, about what to do with all of this information. But I wasn't listening. I was staring at the documents Catherine had left behind, at the proof of my mother's betrayal, at the evidence that my entire family had been built on secrets and lies and blood money. I looked at Jacob. How many more secrets are there? Maria, how many? My voice was ice. How many more things am I going to discover? How many more people knew the truth while I was dying inside with guilt? I don't know, he whispered. I swear to God, I don't know. I didn't believe him. I would never believe him again. Inside the house, my phone was ringing. When I answered, it was Richard, Catherine's husband. Maria, what the hell did you tell Catherine? She just came home hysterical. She's throwing things. She's saying she wants a divorce from me because I'm just like her father. What is going on? Put her on the phone. She won't talk to anyone. She locked herself in the bedroom. Maria, what happened? I hung up. There was nothing I could say that would make any of this better. Carl was still there, still waiting for direction, still trying to help. But I realized with sudden clarity that I couldn't involve him further. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about survival. Carl, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to lose the paperwork on Michael Brennan for 48 hours. Keep him in holding on whatever charges you can make stick, but don't process anything official yet. And don't mention Jacob's confession to anyone. Carl's face hardened. Maria, that's obstruction. I know what it is. But I need time to figure out who else is involved in this, who else knew about my mother's blackmail scheme, and what other threats are still out there. Brennan said someone in my family hired him. If that's true, they're still watching, still waiting. And if you arrest Jacob now, if this becomes official, whoever's behind this will disappear. Or they'll come at you harder, Carl said. Let them. My voice was steady, cold. I want them to come at me. Because I'm done being the victim in this story. I'm done being the guilt-ridden mother who let everyone use her pain as cover for their crimes. I looked at Jacob, who was standing on the porch looking older and more broken than I'd ever seen him. For 40 years, I've been asking forgiveness for something I didn't do. Now it's time to find out who else needs to ask for mine. Carl left reluctantly, extracting a promise that I'd call him if anything dangerous happened. Jacob started to follow me inside, but I held up a hand. Sleep in the guest room tonight. I can't look at you right now. He opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it and simply nodded. Alone in our bedroom, my bedroom now, I supposed, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in 72 hours. My entire life had been a lie. My guilt, carefully maintained and nurtured for 4 decades, had been built on my husband's crime and my mother's greed. And somewhere out there, someone else was pulling strings. Someone who'd hired Michael Brennan to come after us. Someone in my family who wanted to watch us burn. I needed to know who. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're asking the right questions, Maria. But you're not ready for the answers. Stop digging, or everyone you love will pay the price. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, try me. No response came, but I knew I'd just declared war on whoever was behind this. And I intended to win. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with every document spread before me. Jacob's confession, the property records Catherine had found, the threatening notes, bank statements from 1986. I made lists, drew connections, tried to map out who knew what and when. By dawn, I had 3 names circled: my brother, Anthony; Jacob's sister, Isabel; and Richard, Catherine's husband. Anthony was the most obvious suspect. He'd been 25 when the boys died, already married with his own child. He'd been there at the funeral, had helped coordinate everything afterward. He would have had access to our house during those chaotic weeks. If my mother had confided in anyone about Jacob's confession, it would have been Anthony, her favorite, her golden boy. But Anthony had died 6 years ago. Heart attack at 62. Unless he'd set this in motion before his death. Isabel was more complicated. Jacob's sister had never liked me, had always thought her brother married beneath him when he chose a Portuguese immigrant's daughter instead of someone from their Brazilian community. After the boys died, she'd made pointed comments about my carelessness, my exhaustion, my inability to handle motherhood properly. Had she known the truth all along? Had she been twisting the knife deliberately? And then there was Richard, Catherine's husband of 15 years, a corporate lawyer who'd always seemed a bit too interested in our financial situation, who'd suggested more than once that we should consider selling the farm and downsizing, who'd benefited from Catherine's trust fund, the blood money from my mother's blackmail scheme, without ever questioning its origin. The burner phone I'd bought on my way home from the police station yesterday sat on the table beside me. I'd learned a few things in my 68 years, including how to be discreet when necessary. I picked it up and dialed the first number. Anthony's widow, Lucia, answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Lucia, it's Maria. I'm sorry to call so early." "Maria, is everything all right? It's 5 in the morning. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Anthony ever mention anything about the night Michael and David died? Anything unusual?" A long pause. "What kind of thing? Anything about Jacob? About what might have really happened that night?" Another pause. Longer this time. When Lucia spoke again, her voice was careful. "Why are you asking this now, after all these years?" "Because I've learned some things. About my mother. About money she was receiving. And I think Anthony might have known about it." "Maria," Lucia sighed heavily. "Anthony made me promise never to tell you. He said it would only hurt you more." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Tell me what?" "About 6 months before he died, Anthony got a call. From some man he didn't know. The man said he had information about your boy's accident. Information that would interest the family. He wanted money to keep quiet about it. Did Anthony pay him?" "No. Anthony told him to go to hell. But after that call, Anthony started asking questions. He went through your mother's papers. She'd left boxes in his attic when she moved to the nursing home. He found bank statements, letters, records of payments to Thomas Carver." I gripped the phone tighter. "What did he do with them?" "He was going to tell you. He'd decided you deserved to know the truth. But then he had the heart attack." Lucia's voice broke slightly. "The day before he died, he told me where the boxes were. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you got them. But then after the funeral, I couldn't find them. Someone had taken them from the attic. I assumed maybe you'd already collected your mother's things, so I never said anything." "I never took anything from Anthony's attic," I said slowly. "Who else had access to his house after he died?" "Everyone. The whole family was there for the funeral, for the wake. Isabel stayed for a week helping me sort through things. Your nephew Jeffrey was there. Catherine and Richard came for a few days." She paused. "Maria, what's really going on?" I thanked her and hung up without answering. My hands were shaking. Someone had stolen those boxes. Someone in the family who'd been at Anthony's funeral, who knew what was in them, who'd been sitting on that information for 6 years. The sun was rising now, painting the kitchen in shades of gold that felt like a mockery. Jacob shuffled in from the guest room, looking like he'd aged another decade overnight. "Maria, Sit down. We need to talk about your sister." His face went pale. "Isabel? What about her? How much does she know about that night?" "Nothing. I never told her anything." "Are you sure? Because someone in this family has been orchestrating this whole thing, and Isabel is one of the few people who was at Anthony's house after he died. She could have taken the boxes." Jacob sat heavily. Isabel wouldn't. She couldn't. She hated me for 40 years, Jacob. She blamed me for the boys' deaths publicly while knowing the truth privately. That takes a special kind of cruelty. Before Jacob could respond, my phone rang. Catherine. Mom. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying all night. I need to talk to you. Alone. Where? Meet me at the cemetery. 1 hour. She hung up before I could ask questions. The cemetery where Michael and David were buried sat on a hill overlooking town. I hadn't been there in 5 years. The guilt had always been too heavy, the weight of seeing their names on that shared headstone too much to bear. But today, I walked through the gates with my spine straight and my head high, because I knew now that the guilt I'd carried wasn't mine to bear. It had been placed on me by others, carefully cultivated and maintained while they profited from my pain. Catherine was already there, standing before the boy's grave. When she saw me, her face crumpled. I can't stop thinking about them, she said. About what their lives could have been. Michael would be 47 now. David would be 45. They could have had families, careers, lives. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. And Dad took all of that. Not you. Him. I know. I've spent my whole life competing with ghosts. The perfect older brothers I never measured up to. The sons Dad really wanted instead of the daughter he got stuck with. And all this time, he was the one who killed them. I moved closer and put my arms around her. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against me, sobbing like she hadn't since she was a child. Richard wants to know what's going on, she said when she could speak again. He's angry that I won't tell him. He says I'm shutting him out. Maybe you should shut him out, I said carefully, until we know who else is involved in this. Catherine pulled back. You think Richard? No, Mom, no, he wouldn't. Someone hired Michael Brennan. Someone in the family who had access to your grandmother's blackmail records. Richard has been very interested in our finances. He suggested we sell the farm. He knows about your trust fund. That doesn't mean... It doesn't prove anything, I agreed. But it means we need to be careful. The text I got last night came from someone who knows I'm investigating. Someone who's watching us closely. Catherine's face had gone white. What text? I showed her. She read it twice, her hands trembling. This is insane. Our family is... She stopped. Jesus. Our family is exactly the kind of family where this could happen, isn't it? We're all so busy keeping secrets and nursing grievances that none of us actually talk to each other. She wasn't wrong. The Oliveira Santos clan had always been more about appearances than substance. We gathered for holidays and funerals, smiled for photos, maintained the fiction of being close. But underneath, we were strangers bound by blood and little else. I need you to do something for me, I said. Can you get access to Richard's computer? His files? Mom, I'm not asking you to spy on your husband for no reason. I'm asking you to protect yourself. If Richard is involved in this, you need to know. And if he's not, then we can rule him out and focus on who else it could be. Catherine looked at the boy's grave, then back at me. Okay, but if I don't find anything, then we look elsewhere. But Catherine, don't tell him what you're doing. Don't tell anyone. After she left, I stood alone at the grave for the first time in years. The headstone was simple. Michael John Oliveira, 1978-1985. David Paul Oliveira, 1980-1985. Beloved sons. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, I whispered. I'm sorry I let them make me feel like I didn't deserve to be here. But I'm going to fix this. I'm going to find out everyone who knew the truth and everyone who profited from it. And I'm going to make sure they pay. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. I drove home to find a car I didn't recognize in the driveway. A silver BMW with New York plates. Through the window, I could see Jacob talking to a woman I hadn't seen in 15 years. Isabel. My sister-in-law sat in my kitchen like she owned it, perfectly coiffed and expensively dressed. She'd always had money. Her husband owned a chain of restaurants in New York, but there was something about the way she carried herself that spoke of even greater wealth now. Maria. She stood and offered her cheek for a kiss I didn't give. Jacob called me this morning. He said there's been some trouble. What kind of trouble did he tell you about? I asked, watching her carefully. Something about an extortion attempt. Someone claiming your family owed money to criminals from years ago. She sat back down delicately. I came as soon as I heard. Family should stick together in times like these. How considerate of you. Especially since you've spent the last 40 years blaming me for my son's deaths. Isabel's mask slipped slightly. I never blamed you, Maria. I was concerned about you. You were always so fragile, so guilt-ridden over an accident I didn't cause. The room went very quiet. Jacob's face had gone gray. What are you talking about? Isabel asked, but her voice was too controlled, too careful. I'm talking about the fact that Jacob drugged me the night of the accident, that he gave me sedatives so I'd sleep through the night while he went to pay off loan sharks, that I crashed because I was impaired, not because I was careless or exhausted or any of the other things you've implied for 40 years. Isabel's face remained perfectly composed. That's ridiculous. Jacob would never... Jacob confessed 3 days ago. It's all written down. And what's interesting is that someone else knew about that confession. Someone hired Michael Brennan to extort us using that information. Someone in our family. You think I... Isabel laughed, but it sounded forced. Maria, you're clearly upset. You're not thinking straight. Why would I... Why would you what? Why would you use your brother's guilt and my pain to extort money? I don't know, Isabel. Why don't you tell me? Isabel stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I came here to help, and you're accusing me of... I don't even know what you're accusing me of. Sit down. Something in my voice made her obey. I pulled out the property records Catherine had found, the ones showing payments from Thomas Carver. My mother was blackmailing the loan sharks. Did you know that? Isabel's face remained blank, but I saw her fingers tighten on her purse. She collected money for years. Money that eventually went to Catherine. But here's what I've been wondering. If my mother was blackmailing them, what's to say she was the only one? What's to say someone else didn't learn what she was doing and decide to continue the family business? You have no proof. I don't need proof yet. I just need to know who had opportunity. And you, Isabel, had plenty of opportunities. You were at our house after the accident. You were at my mother's nursing home regularly. You were at my brother Anthony's house after he died, when someone stole boxes of my mother's papers from his attic. Isabel's carefully maintained composure was cracking. This is insane. You're paranoid. You're inventing conspiracies because you can't accept that your husband... My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Found something on Richard's computer. You need to see this. Coming to the house now. I looked at Isabel. My daughter just found evidence on her husband's computer. Evidence of who's really behind this. So, I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the truth before she gets here and we all find out together. Isabel's hands were shaking now. For a moment, I thought she might confess. But then her face hardened into something cold and mean. You always were weak, Maria. A weak woman with a weak spine who let guilt rule her life. And now you want to blame everyone else for your misery? Go ahead. Investigate all you want. You'll find I had nothing to do with any of this. She stood and walked toward the door, but before she could leave, Catherine's car screeched into the driveway. My daughter burst through the door, her laptop in her hands, her face flushed. Mom, I found emails. Dozens of them. Between Richard and... She stopped, seeing Isabel. Aunt Isabel? What are you doing here? I was just leaving, Isabel said coldly. No. I stepped in front of the door. You're not going anywhere. Catherine, show me what you found. Catherine set her laptop on the kitchen table and pulled up an email folder. I scanned the messages quickly, my blood turning to ice with each line I read. Emails between Richard and Michael Brennan, going back 8 months. Plans to leverage the Oliveira situation. Discussions of how much money they could extract. References to additional pressure points and insurance policies. And then, at the bottom of the chain, an email from a third address. An encrypted account with no name attached. Everything is in place. The old woman's records will be enough to destroy them both. Make sure you extract maximum value before the authorities get involved. And make sure Maria suffers. Who sent this? I asked. My voice deadly quiet. Catherine clicked to show the routing information. It bounced through several servers, but I managed to trace it back to the original IP address. It came from a computer in Westchester, New York. She looked at Isabel. That's where you live, isn't it, Aunt Isabel? Isabel's face had gone white. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have... The timestamp shows it was sent at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The same Tuesday you posted on Facebook about being unable to sleep because of family concerns. Catherine's voice was shaking but determined. It was you. You set this whole thing up. You brought Richard in. You hired Brennan. You've been orchestrating everything. Jacob made a sound like a wounded animal. Isabel, how could you? How could I? Isabel's composure shattered completely. How could I? You killed your sons, Jacob. You drugged your wife and got your children killed, and you never paid for it. You got to live your life, keep your farm, play the grieving father while our whole family... She stopped, breathing hard, realizing she'd said too much. While what? I asked. While you what, Isabel? Her eyes were wild now, desperate. While I paid for your sins. Do you know what it's like being the sister of a child killer? Do you know how it feels to watch people whisper? To wonder if it runs in the family? My children suffered because of you, Jacob. They were bullied, ostracized, all because their uncle's family had that tragedy. And you just got to keep living, keep pretending, while Maria played the martyr and everyone felt sorry for her. So you decided to destroy us both, I said quietly. You've been waiting 40 years for revenge. I've been waiting 40 years for justice, Isabel spat. And when I found those boxes at Anthony's house, when I saw what your mother had done, I realized I could have both. I could make you pay and profit from it. I brought Richard in because he was the only one smart enough to help me set it up properly. We hired Brennan to be the face of it, so nothing could trace back to us. It was perfect. Except it wasn't, Catherine said, her voice breaking. Because you dragged me into it. You used my trust fund, my marriage, my entire life as part of your revenge scheme. You made me complicit in your... You were always complicit, Isabel shouted. You lived off blood money your whole adult life and never questioned it. You're just like your father, weak and willfully blind. The slap echoed through the kitchen. I'd moved before I realized it, my palm connecting with Isabel's cheek hard enough to snap her head sideways. Don't you dare speak to my daughter that way. Isabel touched her reddening cheek, her eyes filling with tears of rage and pain. You're all going to pay now, all of you. I have copies of everything. Jacob's confession, the bank records, evidence of the cover-up. I'll destroy this family if you try to stop me. No, I said calmly. You won't. Because Carl Morrison is outside right now with a warrant for your arrest. And Richard's too. Isabel's face went slack. What? I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd been making since she started her confession. You just admitted to conspiracy, extortion, and fraud. And unlike my husband's 40-year-old confession, this evidence is fresh, recorded, and admissible in court. Through the window, I saw Carl's car pulling up, along with 2 police cruisers. Isabel looked at the door, at the laptop with her emails displayed, at the phone with her confession still playing. Her face crumpled. You set me up. I gave you every chance to tell the truth, I said. You chose revenge instead. Carl and the officers entered, and I watched as they read Isabel her rights. She was sobbing now, all her carefully maintained composure destroyed. Jacob sat at the table with his head in his hands, his sister's betrayal perhaps more devastating than anything else that had happened. Catherine stood beside me, watching her aunt being led away in handcuffs. Richard? She asked quietly. They're arresting him at your house right now, Carl said gently. I'm sorry, Catherine. My daughter nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. I need to call a lawyer. For the divorce. After they'd all left, the police, Isabel, the evidence, the house felt hollow and strange. Jacob hadn't moved from the table. Catherine had gone to her car to make calls. And I stood in the kitchen where everything had come to a head, feeling the weight of 40 years finally beginning to lift. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I walked to the phone and dialed the number I'd memorized 40 years ago, but never called. The hospital where Michael and David had been pronounced dead. where I'd woken up to find my world destroyed. "Medical records, please," I said when someone answered. It took 20 minutes of explaining, of requesting, of insisting. But finally, they found what I needed. The toxicology report from the night of the accident. The one that had never been requested because there was no reason to test me for drugs. No reason to suspect anything other than exhaustion and grief. "Can you tell me what's in my file from October 17th, 1985? I asked. The records clerk read through it. "There's a note here from the attending physician. It says, patient showed signs of possible sedative use, dilated pupils, confusion beyond what would be expected from shock alone, difficulty with motor coordination. No test ordered due to grief-related assumption. Recommend follow-up if symptoms persist." Someone had noticed. Someone had seen the signs and documented them, then let it go because it seemed kinder to assume I was just devastated. If I'd known. If anyone had told me. If that doctor had insisted on testing. But they hadn't. And I'd carried the guilt for 40 years. I thanked the clerk and hung up. Catherine came back inside. "Mom, the lawyers say this could take months. The criminal cases against Isabel and Richard, the divorce proceedings, sorting out what money needs to be returned or seized." She sat down heavily. "Our whole family is going to be destroyed by this." "Our family was destroyed 40 years ago," I said quietly. "We've just been pretending otherwise. Maybe now we can start rebuilding something real." She looked at me with something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you really believe that?" "I have to," I said. "Because the alternative is letting Isabel win. Letting all of them win. And I'm done losing." The sun was setting now, painting the farm in shades of amber and gold. In the distance, I could see the garden where Jacob had buried his confession 40 years ago, where truth had waited in the dark all this time. Tomorrow, there would be court dates and lawyers and the slow, painful process of justice. But tonight, for the first time in 40 years, I would sleep without the weight of false guilt crushing my chest. Tonight, I was finally free. The call came at 6 a.m., 3 days after Isabel's arrest. "Mrs. Oliveira, this is Detective Roberta Chen from the District Attorney's Office. We need you to come in. There's been a development in your case." I dressed carefully. Not the farm clothes I'd been living in, but the navy suit I kept for funerals and formal occasions. Catherine met me at the courthouse, her face drawn and pale. She'd moved back home temporarily, unable to stay in the house she'd shared with Richard. "They won't tell me what this is about," she said as we walked through the metal detectors. "Just that it's urgent and involves all of us." "All of us? You, me, Dad, and—" She paused. "Aunt Isabel requested a meeting. Through her lawyer. She says she has information that changes everything." My stomach tightened. Isabel had been held without bail, charged with conspiracy to commit extortion, fraud, and a host of other crimes. What could she possibly have to offer now? The conference room was crowded. Detective Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. Carl Morrison, there as a courtesy since he'd been involved from the start. Isabel's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear. And Isabel herself, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup for the first time I could remember. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Jacob entered last, moving slowly, looking at everyone except his sister. The detective gestured for us all to sit. "Thank you for coming. Ms. Isabel Oliveira Santos has indicated she wishes to make a full statement regarding the events of the past 40 years. Her attorney has negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for complete cooperation and disclosure." Detective Chen looked at Isabel. "You understand that everything you say here is being recorded and will be used in all related proceedings?" "I understand," Isabel said quietly. Her voice was different, stripped of its usual imperious tone, raw and exhausted. "Then please proceed." Isabel looked at her hands, folded on the table in front of her. When she spoke, she didn't look at any of us. "I was 17 when my mother died. Jacob was 22, already married to you, Maria, already living in America. I was alone in São Paulo with our father, who drank too much and blamed me for everything. Jacob sent money sometimes, but it was never enough. I was angry at him for leaving, for building a new life while I was trapped. She paused, swallowing hard. When I finally got to America at 19, I'd already decided I hated you, Maria. You were everything I wasn't. Gentle, kind, the sort of woman people wanted to protect. I saw how Jacob looked at you, how he'd transformed himself for you. I wanted him to look at me that way, to care about me the way he cared about you. Jacob's face had gone white. Isabel, let me finish. Isabel's voice was sharp, then softened. I need to say this. All of it. She took a breath and continued. I was at your house the night before the accident. Jacob called me, panicked, asking if he could borrow money. He told me about the debt, about the threats, about his plan to meet them at the quarry. He showed me the sedative he was going to give you. I told him he was insane, that he couldn't drug his own wife. But he was desperate, and She closed her eyes. I didn't stop him. I told him to do what he had to do to protect his family. The room was dead silent. The next day, when I heard about the accident, when I learned Michael and David were dead and you survived, I was devastated. But I was also angry. Angry at Jacob for what he'd done. Angry at you for surviving when the boys didn't. Angry at myself for not stopping him. So I transferred all that anger onto you, Maria. I spent 40 years making you feel like it was your fault, because I couldn't face that it was partially mine. Catherine made a small sound, quickly suppressed. Isabel glanced at her, then away. Your mother figured out what happened about 6 months after the accident. I don't know how. Maybe Jacob confessed to her in a moment of weakness. Maybe she just put the pieces together. She was a sharp woman. She came to me and told me she knew. She said she was going to expose Jacob unless he paid her. Why would she come to you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because she knew I'd help her. She knew I felt guilty about not stopping Jacob, and she used that. She said if I helped her collect the blackmail money, she'd keep my involvement secret. If I didn't, she'd tell everyone I'd known about the plan beforehand and done nothing. Isabel's hands were shaking now. So I became her intermediary. I was the one who contacted Thomas Carver and set up the payment arrangement. I was the one who collected the money and delivered it to your mother. For 5 years, until she died. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You helped her blackmail your own brother? Yes. Isabel's voice broke. And I justified it by telling myself it was what Jacob deserved. That he needed to pay for what he'd done. But really, I was just a coward who was afraid of being exposed. Detective Chen leaned forward. What happened when Maria's mother died? The payments stopped. Carver thought he was finally free. But I kept copies of everything. The ledgers, the bank records, the documentation. Insurance, I told myself. In case I ever needed it. Isabel laughed bitterly. And I did need it. 35 years later, when my husband's restaurant started failing and we were drowning in debt, I looked at those records and saw a way out. So you recruited Richard, I said. I recruited Richard because he was ambitious and morally flexible and married to Catherine, which gave us access to your family dynamics. I recruited Michael Brennan because he was Thomas Carver's son-in-law and had a reputation for running cons. And I orchestrated the whole thing to look like legitimate debt collection so that even if it fell apart, the real target would be exposed. The real target, Catherine said slowly. You mean Dad? I meant both of them. Isabel looked at me for the first time. I wanted you to suffer, Maria. I wanted you to finally know what Jacob had done. I wanted your perfect martyrdom destroyed. I wanted everyone to see that you'd been carrying guilt for a crime you didn't commit while the real murderer walked free. They were children, Jacob said, his voice cracking. My sons were children, and you wanted to use their deaths for revenge? I wanted justice! Isabel slammed her hand on the table. You killed them, Jacob. You poisoned your wife and sent her out to drive and killed your own children. And you let Maria take the blame for 40 years. You destroyed her life. So you decided to finish the job? I asked quietly. Isabel stared at me. What? You wanted to destroy me even further. You wanted to take everything I had left. My dignity. My belief that at least I'd tried my best that night. My peace with my son's memory. You wanted to burn it all down. I leaned forward. Did it make you feel better, Isabel? Did carrying that hatred for 40 years ease your own guilt? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. No, she whispered. It made everything worse. Every year, I got angrier and more bitter, and I couldn't stop. I'd built my whole identity around hating you both, and I didn't know how to be anyone else. Detective Chen cleared her throat. Ms. Oliveira Santos, you mentioned you have documentation of everything. We'll need all of it. I'll give you everything, Isabel said. The original ledgers from Carver's estate, the bank records, emails, recorded phone calls. I documented it all because I thought I was being clever. I thought I was protecting myself. She looked at her lawyer. I'm prepared to testify against Richard and Michael Brennan. I'll cooperate fully with the prosecution. In exchange for what? Catherine asked sharply. Isabel's lawyer spoke up. In exchange for a reduced sentence. 10 years instead of 25, with the possibility of parole after 7. Absolutely not, Catherine said. She tried to destroy our entire family. Catherine. I put my hand on her arm. Let's hear what else she has to say. Isabel looked at me with something like surprise. There's more. Things that will help you understand what really happened that night. Things even Jacob doesn't know. Jacob's head snapped up. What things? Thomas Carver kept detailed records of the meeting at the quarry. Recordings even. He didn't trust anyone, so he taped everything. When I found his ledgers in Brennan's possession, I found the recordings too. They prove that when Jacob met with them that night, when he told them Maria had taken the car while drugged, they didn't just laugh. She paused, her expression complex. They followed her. They wanted to see if she'd crash, if she'd get caught. They thought it was entertaining. And when she did crash, when the police and ambulances arrived, they sat in their car watching the whole thing. Carver recorded himself laughing about it, saying it was better than the movies. They could have called for help sooner, could have flagged down the ambulance faster, but they were too busy enjoying the show. The room spun around me. Jacob made a choking sound. They watched my boys die for entertainment? They watched the whole thing unfold and did nothing. If they'd called 911 immediately when they saw the crash, the response time would have been faster. The boys might have... Isabel's voice trailed off. The recordings prove culpability beyond just the loan. They prove manslaughter by criminal negligence. Detective Chen was writing furiously. These recordings, where are they? In a safety deposit box. I'll give you the key and the authorization. Isabel looked at me again. I know this doesn't fix anything. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that the people who hurt you most that night weren't just Jacob. It was Carver and his associates. And they're beyond your reach now, but their memories aren't. You can make sure everyone knows what kind of men they really were. I stood abruptly, needing air, needing space. Catherine followed me out into the hallway. Mom, are you okay? No. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. They watched. They sat in their car and watched our boys die and thought it was funny. They were monsters. Yes, but so was Isabel. So was my mother. So was... I looked back through the window at Jacob, sitting with his head in his hands. So was my husband. What are you going to do? I didn't answer. I didn't know. Carl came out a few minutes later. Maria, they're asking if you want to make a statement. About Isabel's plea deal. What does Jacob want? He refuses to speak to her, says he'll never forgive her and doesn't care what happens to her. And Richard? Richard's lawyer is fighting everything. Claims he was coerced, that Isabel manipulated him. It's going to be a long trial. I looked through the window at Isabel, still sitting at that table in her orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and more broken than I'd ever imagined she could look. Tell them I'll agree to the plea deal on 3 conditions, I said. Carl pulled out a notepad. Go ahead. First, Isabel provides every piece of evidence she has. The recordings, the ledgers, everything. No holding back, no negotiating. Complete transparency. Done. Second, she publicly acknowledges what she did. Not just in court, but in a statement to the media. I want everyone who whispered about me for 40 years to know the truth. Carl nodded. That can be arranged. And third, Third, she never contacts me or my family again. No letters from prison, no attempts at reconciliation, nothing. She disappears from our lives completely. Maria, Carl hesitated. Are you sure? She's still Jacob's sister. Your family. She stopped being family when she decided to profit from my children's deaths. I looked at him. Those are my conditions. Take them or leave them. An hour later, the deal was signed. Isabel would serve 10 years with the possibility of parole after 7. She would provide all evidence and testimony. She would issue a public statement. And she would have no contact with us for the rest of her life. As we left the courthouse, Catherine slipped her hand into mine. That was strong, Mom. Setting boundaries like that. It was necessary, I said. For too long, I let people use my guilt and my grief as weapons against me. I'm done being anyone's victim. We drove back to the farm in silence. When we arrived, Jacob was standing in the driveway, having driven separately. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Maria, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve to ask for it. But I need you to know. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted my sister to— Stop, I said quietly. Just stop, Jacob. He fell silent. Tomorrow we're having a family meeting. Not just you and me and Catherine. Everyone. Every cousin. Every aunt and uncle still alive. Everyone who's been whispering about our family for 40 years. We're going to tell them everything. The truth about what happened, about what you did, about what Isabel did, about all of it. Maria, that will destroy— What? Our reputation? Our family's good name? I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. Those things were destroyed 40 years ago. We've just been pretending otherwise. It's time to stop pretending. Catherine squeezed my hand. I'll help you organize it. I'll make the calls. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen with all the evidence spread before me one last time. The confession letter, the bank records, the property deeds, the threatening notes, the emails between Isabel and Richard. And tomorrow, I would add one more document to the pile. My own statement. My truth, in my own words, about 40 years of manufactured guilt and the people who'd used it to control me. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. My name is Maria Oliveira. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I have carried the guilt of my son's deaths. I have believed I killed them through carelessness, through exhaustion, through my own inadequacy as a mother. Today, I learned the truth. Today, I am finally free. The words flowed out of me like water from a broken dam. Decades of pain and guilt and self-recrimination, finally finding release in black ink on white paper. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. Catherine had fallen asleep on the couch. Jacob was in the guest room, still exiled, and I sat alone with my truth, feeling lighter than I had in 40 years. Tomorrow, there would be a reckoning. Tomorrow, the family would gather and hear everything. Tomorrow, I would speak my truth and let the consequences fall where they may. But tonight, I was simply Maria, not the guilty mother, not the tragic figure, not the victim, just Maria, survivor, fighter, truth-teller, and that was enough. The family gathered on Sunday at 2 p.m. I'd rented the community center in town, neutral ground, public enough to discourage any dramatic outbursts. Catherine had made 47 phone calls over 2 days, reaching every branch of the family tree. Some had been eager to come, sensing drama. Others had been reluctant, suspicious of my sudden desire for a family meeting after years of keeping to myself. They came anyway. All of them. I watched them arrive from the window of the small office where I was preparing. My cousin Helena, who'd always looked at me with pity. Jacob's brother Jeffrey, who'd sided with Isabel in every family dispute. Catherine's cousins from my side, young people who barely remembered Michael and David, but had grown up hearing the story whispered at family gatherings. Even Lucia, Anthony's widow, who hugged me tightly when she arrived and whispered, "I'm proud of you." By 2 p.m., 63 people filled the community center, the largest gathering of the Oliveira Santos clan in decades. They sat in folding chairs arranged in rows, murmuring to each other, glancing at me with curiosity and confusion as I stood at the front beside a table stacked with documents. Catherine sat in the front row, her face pale but determined. Jacob sat in the back, apart from everyone, his shoulders hunched. Carl Morrison stood by the door, present at my request as both witness and protection should anyone become aggressive. At exactly 2 p.m., I stepped to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," I began. My voice was steady, amplified through the speakers. "I know many of you are wondering why I called this gathering. Some of you probably think I've finally lost my mind after 40 years of grief." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. "I'm going to tell you a story," I continued. "Some of you know parts of it. Some of you think you know all of it. But today, you're going to hear the truth. The complete, unvarnished truth about what happened on October 17th, 1985, and everything that came after." The room went silent. "On that night, my sons Michael and David died in a car accident. I was driving. The car went off the road on a curve near Miller's Creek, rolled twice, and when I woke up in the hospital, my boys were gone." I paused, letting the familiar story settle. For 40 years, I believed it was my fault. I believed I'd fallen asleep at the wheel because I was exhausted, because I was weak, because I was inadequate as a mother. I picked up Jacob's confession letter from the table. 3 weeks ago, I learned the truth. My husband drugged me that night. He put sedatives in my tea, heavy sedatives mixed with other compounds, because he needed me unconscious. He was involved with loan sharks, owed them money, and was planning to meet them that night to negotiate. He didn't want me to know. So he poisoned me. Gasps and murmurs erupted. Jacob didn't move, didn't look up. I kept speaking. I left the house before the drugs took full effect because I received a call that my mother was dying. I drove while impaired, not through any fault of my own, but because my husband had drugged me without my knowledge or consent. The accident that killed Michael and David was not caused by my carelessness. It was caused by my husband's decision to chemically incapacitate me. The murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted, "Jacob, is this true?" Jacob stood slowly. His voice was barely audible. "Yes, it's all true." The room exploded. People shouting, some standing, demanding answers. I let it continue for 30 seconds, then raised my hand. Gradually, they quieted. "There's more," I said. "My mother discovered what Jacob had done, and instead of going to the police, instead of seeking justice, she blackmailed him. She blackmailed the loan sharks who'd been involved. For 5 years, she collected money that eventually went into a trust for Catherine. Money that came from extorting the people responsible for my children's deaths." I saw Catherine wipe tears from her face. Several family members turned to stare at her. My mother had help with this blackmail scheme. Jacob's sister, Isabel, was her intermediary. Isabel collected the money, facilitated the payments, and kept the secret for decades. When my mother died, Isabel kept copies of all the evidence. And 6 years ago, when her own finances collapsed, she decided to use that evidence for one final payday. I explained the extortion scheme, Michael Brennan, Richard's involvement, the attempt to extract $400,000. I explained how Isabel had orchestrated everything, driven by 40 years of resentment and guilt that had curdled into something poisonous. "Isabel was arrested 10 days ago," I said. "She's accepted a plea deal. She'll serve time for her crimes. Richard is currently awaiting trial, and the man they hired, Michael Brennan, is also in custody." The room was deathly silent now. Every eye was on me. "But here's what I want you all to understand," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "For 40 years, I carried guilt that wasn't mine. For 40 years, I believed I'd failed my children. And for 40 years, members of this family, people in this room, allowed me to carry that burden while knowing or suspecting the truth was different." I looked around at the faces staring back at me. Some looked shocked. Some looked ashamed. Some looked defensive. How many of you wondered why my mother suddenly had money in 1986? How many of you heard whispers about Jacob's business troubles and chose not to ask questions? How many of you saw me drowning in grief and guilt and said nothing because it was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths? Helena stood up, her face red. That's not fair, Maria. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, I interrupted. There's a difference. Our family has always been good at keeping secrets, at maintaining appearances, at pretending everything is fine while rot spreads underneath. We're good at whispering and gossiping, but terrible at truth-telling. And that ends today. I picked up the statement I'd written the night before. I've prepared copies of this for anyone who wants to read it. It's my complete account of what happened. The drugging, the accident, the blackmail, the extortion, all of it. I'm also giving copies to the local newspaper and to the police for their records. The truth is going to be public. Anyone who wants to whisper about the Oliveira family now will have to whisper the real story. I set down the stack of papers. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm not asking for your forgiveness on behalf of my husband or his sister or my mother. I'm simply telling you the truth so that you can stop making assumptions about my life, my grief, and my guilt. Jeffrey, Jacob's brother, stood up slowly. He was a large man, intimidating when he wanted to be. And what do you expect us to do with this information, Maria? Pretend Jacob isn't our brother? Cut him out of the family? I expect you to do whatever your conscience demands, I said calmly. Jacob will face legal consequences for what he did. The statute of limitations for some of his actions has passed, but there are still charges that can be filed. He's already meeting with prosecutors. What the family does with him is your decision. And what are you going to do? Someone called from the back. Are you divorcing him? I looked at Jacob, still sitting in the back row, looking like a broken shell of the man I'd married 45 years ago. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Right now we're separated. He's living in the guest room. We're in counseling. Not marriage counseling, but trauma counseling. I'm working through 40 years of manufactured guilt, and he's working through 40 years of genuine guilt. Whether we can come back from this, I truly don't know. Catherine stood and came to stand beside me. What I do know, she said, her voice shaking but clear, is that my mother deserves support instead of judgment. She deserves family who will stand with her instead of whispering behind her back, and she deserves the truth to be known. She looked at the assembled family with steel in her eyes, steel I recognized as my own. I'm divorcing Richard. I'm returning every penny that came from my grandmother's trust fund. It's blood money, and I won't keep it. I'm testifying against my Aunt Isabel and against my soon-to-be ex-husband, and I'm done pretending our family is anything other than what it is. Broken, secretive, and in desperate need of change. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but a few, including Lucia, started clapping. The applause spread slowly until about half the room was clapping, while the other half sat in stunned silence. When the applause died down, I spoke again. I have one more thing to share with you. Some of you may not want to hear this, but you need to. I nodded to Carl, who brought out a laptop and connected it to the projector. On the screen appeared a still image, a grainy photograph of the accident site from 1985. The loan sharks who were involved that night, Thomas Carver and his associates, didn't just laugh when they heard I was driving while drugged. They followed me. They watched the accident happen. And they recorded themselves watching my children die, talking about how entertaining it was. The room gasped collectively. Someone began crying. These recordings were recovered as part of Isabel's evidence. They proved that Carver and his associates could have called for help immediately, but chose not to. They chose to watch instead. The medical examiner's report suggests that faster intervention might have saved David. His injuries, while severe, were not immediately fatal. He died from blood loss and shock while those men sat in their car, watching and laughing. Jacob made a sound like a wounded animal. Several people were openly weeping now. I'm telling you this not to traumatize you, but to give you the complete picture. The people responsible for my son's deaths weren't just Jacob. They were a network of criminals who treated human lives as entertainment. Most of them are dead now. Thomas Carver died in 2021. The others died years ago. I can't get justice from them, but I can make sure their names are attached to their crimes forever. I closed the laptop. I'm working with a journalist to write a full account of what happened. It will be published in the Philadelphia Inquirer next month. The story will include everything: the drugging, the blackmail, the recordings, all of it. Our family's dirty secrets will be public knowledge. And I'm at peace with that because the alternative is continuing to live in the shadows of lies. The room was silent, except for the sound of people crying. Now, I said, my voice softening slightly, I want to say something to those of you who've been kind to me over the years. To those who visited, who called, who never made me feel like I was broken or damaged. Thank you. Your kindness sustained me through the darkest times, even when I couldn't fully accept it because of my guilt. I want you to know it mattered. Lucia stood and walked to the front, hugging me tightly. Others followed, cousins I'd barely spoken to in years, family members who'd kept their distance because they didn't know what to say. One by one, they came forward, some to hug me, some just to touch my hand, some to whisper apologies for not asking harder questions. Not everyone approached. Some left immediately, including Jeffrey, who looked at Jacob with disgust as he walked past. Some stayed seated, their faces hard and closed. That was their choice, and I respected it. Catherine and I stood at the front for nearly an hour, accepting condolences that felt more appropriate for a funeral than a family meeting. In a way, I supposed it was a funeral, the death of the lie we'd all been living. When the room finally cleared, only Carl, Catherine, and I remained. Jacob had left at some point without saying goodbye. How do you feel? Carl asked gently. Exhausted, I admitted, but lighter, like I've been carrying a boulder uphill for 40 years and finally got to set it down. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now, we rebuild. We figure out who we are without the lies and the secrets and the guilt. I looked at my daughter. You're going to be okay. You're stronger than you know. I learned from the best, she said, squeezing my hand. That night, I stood in the garden where Jacob had buried his confession all those years ago. The hole had been filled in, the earth tamped down, grass already beginning to grow over it. In the spring, I planned to plant something there, maybe a memorial garden for Michael and David, something living and beautiful to replace the buried secrets. The farmhouse behind me was quiet. Catherine had gone back to her apartment to begin the process of separating her life from Richard's. Jacob was somewhere inside, but I hadn't seen him since the meeting. Eventually, we'd have to talk about what came next. Lawyers, separation agreements, the practical details of ending or restructuring a 45-year marriage. But not tonight. Tonight I stood under the stars and remembered my boys not as symbols of my guilt, but as the children they'd been. Bright, funny, full of potential. I remembered Michael's laugh, David's curiosity, the way they'd fought over toys and hugged each other fiercely. I let myself remember the good without the crushing weight of responsibility for their deaths. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner, I whispered to the night. I'm sorry I let guilt keep me from remembering you clearly, but I know now. And I'm going to make sure people know the truth about what happened to you. The wind rustled through the apple tree, and for a moment, I felt something like peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. I'm proud of you, Mom. Love you. I smiled and typed back. Love you too. We're going to be okay. And for the first time in 40 years, I actually believed it. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee as the sun rose over the farm. I'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woken feeling more rested than I had in decades. The weight that had pressed on my chest for so long was finally, truly gone. There would be hard days ahead. Legal proceedings, therapy, the slow, painful process of deciding what to do about my marriage, the public scrutiny when the newspaper article came out, the judgment from people who'd never understand the complexity of what I'd lived through. But I was ready for it. Because I'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to me, losing my children. Everything else was just logistics. Jacob appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking hesitant. Maria, can we talk? I looked at him. This man who'd been my partner, my betrayer, my burden, my anchor through 40 years of complicated history. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if we had a future. But I knew we needed to try to find some kind of peace, for both our sakes. Yes, I said. We can talk. We sat at the kitchen table where so much of this story had unfolded, and we began the long, difficult work of truth-telling. It would take months, maybe years. Some wounds might never fully heal, but for the first time since that terrible night in 1985, we were starting from a place of honesty instead of lies. And that, I'd learned, was worth everything. 3 months later, I stood at Michael and David's grave with flowers in my hands. Not guilt offerings, but simple expressions of love. The newspaper article had been published. The family had fractured along predictable lines, but the ones who mattered remained close. Isabel was serving her sentence. Richard's trial was ongoing. Jacob and I were in mediation, working toward a legal separation that might someday become reconciliation, or might not. But I was free. Free from guilt I'd never earned. Free from secrets that weren't mine to keep. Free to remember my sons clearly, to grieve them honestly, to honor them without the crushing weight of blame. I knelt and placed the flowers by their headstone. "Your mother is finally at peace," I whispered. "It took 40 years, but I'm finally at peace." The sun was warm on my back. The grass was green and growing, and I walked away from that grave with my head high and my heart, for the first time in 40 years, at rest. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.